Hello, and welcome to Economy 2.0, brought to you by the Silvio Gesell Foundation and the Henry George School. My name is Josh Sidman. Before we get to today's guest, I want to let you know about our upcoming episodes. On Tuesday, February 4th at 1 p.m., we'll be joined by Will Ruddick. Will is a former Stanford particle physicist who in recent years has turned his attention to building alternative local exchange systems in Africa. He's the founder of Grassroots Economics, where he's developed a new exchange model that he calls commitment pooling, which he has used to create over 100 local alternative exchange systems throughout Kenya. And then on Tuesday, February 18th at 6:30 p.m., we'll talk with Ed Dodson. Ed spent his career working in the financial industry, including 20 years at Fannie Mae, and he's also a longtime member of the faculty at the Henry George School. He's published many articles on political economy and history. Ed and I will compare and contrast the ideas of Henry George and Silvio Gesell, and we'll also debate the pros and cons of incrementalism versus wholesale paradigm shift. As always, I want to say a few introductory words about this series, Economy 2.0. Each episode features a guest whose work somehow relates to diagnosing the problems with the economic status quo and/or developing new alternative economic approaches to accomplishing the production and exchange upon which all of our lives depend, so that we'll be prepared in the event that the existing system ever stops functioning. The intention is for this to be a conversation, not a lecture or a class. Anyone joining us live is welcome to join the conversation. To do so, just click the raise hand button under the React tab on your Zoom toolbar. If you have your camera on, I'll bring you on screen when it's your turn. If your camera is off, we'll just hear your voice. You're free to use the Zoom chat, but just keep in mind that I'm unable to monitor it while the meeting is going on and that the chat will not appear in the recorded videos. So if you have something to say, I encourage you to raise your hand and join the conversation. Just to make sure everyone is fully aware, each episode is recorded and shared on the YouTube channels of both the Silvio Gesell Foundation and the Henry George School. Lastly, I want to mention that we're always looking for guests for future episodes of Economy 2.0. I'm sure that some of you are aware of people I'm not familiar with who would have valuable perspectives to share and who would make great guests. So please feel free to get in touch with me via email at josh@silviogesell.com if you have anyone in mind. All right, today's guest. Stef Kuypers began his career in IT and later shifted his focus to economics. He's currently a PhD candidate at the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. I'm sure I butchered the pronunciation of that, in Belgium, where he's focused on developing an alternative monetary model that he calls the sustainable money system, which incorporates both demurrage and universal basic income. Stef and I originally connected through the Silvio Gesell Foundation Substack page, and as we discussed our mutual interest in the subject of monetary reform, I thought he would be a great guest for this series. Stef is also a board member of a group called Happonomy, an organization whose mission is to develop alternatives to the mainstream economic system, which they see as generating negative outcomes in terms of the economy and the environment. I'll put a link to their website in the description section when this is posted to YouTube, and I look forward to learning more about Happonomy in the course of this conversation. So Stef, welcome to Economy 2.0. Why don't you get us started by telling us a bit about your path? How did you go from working in IT to deciding to go back to school for your PhD and to focus on the area of monetary reform?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a weird path that it goes back to 2004 with a kind of a strange start. 2004, I started doing improvisation theater. And I know it maybe sound weird that improvisation theater eventually got me into economy and monetary systems, but it actually played a part in it. When I started doing improv, I all of a sudden came to the realization that I was kind of done with IT, but I didn't know what to do, what else to do. I mean, I had been in IT since the beginning of my career. I taught myself programming when I was 14 years old, so I had quite a history in it. And I actually started a path of exploration. Apart from improv, I did a coaching course. I did a leadership training. I did a business intervention course. I kind of looked everywhere to see where my next career move was. And in 2007, 2008, I took a sabbatical. And it's it's mainly the time off that started putting me on a path that would eventually lead me into the world of monetary systems. Because while I was taking my sabbatical, I started wondering, huh, um, what's happening with the world? Because this is kind of what happens to people if you don't have to work 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, then you start to have time to wonder about things. Why is the world working the way it does? Why do people do what they do? And why is our economy working the way it does? And eventually in 2012, I started wondering, why is it so hard to solve our climate change problem? Because we know what's going on, we know what the solutions are, but for some reason, no one seems to be doing it, or not fast enough anyways. And I started digging into that, and the first thing I came to was our tax system that was taxing labor very high, while there was an abundance of that, and it was taxing resources only a little, while there was a scarcity in that. But I started digging further, and then at one point I came upon the website of Positive Money in the UK, and there they explained how the monetary system worked. And my first thought was, this must be a conspiracy website because it cannot be this crazy. And then a little bit later, the Central Bank of England published a paper that said exactly the same. And I thought like, oh, well, I don't think that the people working at the Central Bank of England are conspiracy theorists. So it is this crazy. And I thought like, you know, creating money from debt, charging an interest in that, and then destroying it when the main lump sum is paid back. This cannot work. So a little bit later, I started writing a simulation to prove to kind of see like can I show that this cannot work, and that resulted into my first paper that I published actually before I started my PhD. And in that I discovered like, well, there are some circumstances under which this can work in a non-growing economy. The only pesky thing that is present is humans. Because both Keynesians state that you can't have a steady state economy with our current debt-based monetary system. And mathematically, they are correct. But there are a couple of assumptions they take and a couple of prerequisites that need to be met, because otherwise it doesn't work. And the prerequisites are banks and companies should start working without net accumulated profit, and people that don't need money need to take out loans. And I just don't see that happening. So mathematically, if you just you issue enough loans and they're paid back, and no one is saving and no one is hoarding profit, yeah, sure, then we can do it. But I kind of think that's not a realistic scenario, so we needed something else. And then I started reading the work of Bernard Lietaer, and I came upon the story of Wurgel. And then I thought, like, oh, this is it. We just need money with demurrage, and then that makes it circulate, and that'll solve things. But when I told this to people, everyone's like, what? But what with my savings? I won't be able to save anything anymore. So so I started pondering on that, like, okay, can we solve that? Because this is a question of financial security. In our current system, people have this idea: if I have enough savings, then I've got financial security, which is an illusion. But and then one day I was in Melbourne at the time. I still remember I was walking down Burke Street towards the Hub, which is a co-working space. It was a sunny day, and along the way I was like, oh, but you know what? We could create money for UBI and couple that to the demurrage, and then we've got a closed system that is self-stabilizing. And that was kind of how I got into it. And in the meantime, I expanded upon the idea. I started discovering my own construction, because it goes beyond the mechanical. It goes into human psychology too. And that's kind of the thing that I see that most economists miss, is they've got beautiful mathematical models, but they completely disregard the fact that people will adapt themselves to the environment that they're in. And most of them have no clue about how people will change their behavior according to their environment. And I think that's a huge blind spot in teachings of economy. That's kind of my path into it in a nutshell.
For the sake of any of the folks in the audience who are not familiar with demurrage, could you describe that concept in your own words? What is it? How does it work? And what is it intended to accomplish?
Yeah. Well, currently, when you have a lot of money, you can make money with it. With the more you can look at demurrage as a kind of parking fee for money. So you park money on your account, then you need to pay a parking fee for it. There's no more interest, so you cannot make money with money anymore. Actually, holding on to money will cost you money. Now, this idea usually freaks people out, because then they go like, oh, but then I work hard and I've got all this money, and then it'll just evaporate through this parking fee thing. But you need to remember that it's coupled with a UBI. And the net result of that is that you've got a much stronger financial security than with savings. Because with savings, you got a pile of money, and once you use it up, it's gone. And that's why I said usually the idea of having savings is an illusion, because people will have a pile of money and then they're afraid to touch it. So they kind of constantly add to the pile, and then they die, and then they've never used any of it. But since in our economy, all money is dead, that means that for the pile of money you have on your bank account, somewhere in the world has to carry the debt. So there have to be losers if we have winners, which is, from a humane perspective, ridiculous. Why would we force people into debt just because that's needed for some people to be rich? What if we can all have enough? And if you have a constant income stream that's guaranteed for the rest of your life, that is a lot safer and gives you way more financial security than a pile of money that when you touch it, the money that you spend is gone. So demurrage is basically a parking fee. There's a couple of I read Sylvia Gesell's work, And the statement he made about demurrage was logical, if you ask me. Currently, if all your physical needs are met, then money becomes the ultimate thing to chase, because money gives you access to everything. Uh, Money doesn't rot, the current type of money. It doesn't rot. It doesn't need maintenance. It doesn't wear down. Well, you could say that inflation wears it down, but if you've got enough money, your financial markets will bring in enough extra money so that inflation actually doesn't hurt you. Inflation only hurts the middle class and below. As soon as you belong to the upper echelons, if you got 100 million or more in your bank account, then inflation doesn't matter anymore. So it becomes, instead of a means to make your economy work, it becomes a goal in itself. And we see that in our current world, people are chasing money. There's also, I read some research about it. If your inequality in your society becomes too large, then chasing wealth will become, the incentive to chase wealth will increase. So if you diminish your inequality, people will no longer be so eager to chase wealth. And this is also something that demurrage does, because it'll eat away the capital from the super rich. And the UBI at the same time will make sure that there's like a floor you cannot drop below. So it brings everyone closer together in terms of equality. It's not a system that creates perfect equality, because we don't want that, but people want fair inequality. And what we currently see is increasingly unfair inequality.
When we were communicating, Stef, you sent me an article which described the yard sale model, which was one perspective on trying to explain the root cause of economic inequality. I think that's an absolutely critical starting point, because if we don't agree, or at least understand the nature of our different perspectives on why economic inequality and economic instability exist, then it makes sense that there's no chance of us coming together on a set of solutions. Would you describe the yard sale model as forming well, first of all, could you describe the yard sale model, and then tell me if you consider that to be central to your understanding of the root causes of economic inequality?
Sure. It's an article I read several years ago. I found it in Scientific American. And the title of the article was, "Is Inequality Inevitable?" It's a Professor Bogosian. And the yard sale model is basically, you take a number of economic actors and you give every actor the same wealth. And then you start picking randomly two actors, and they do a transaction. They transfer 20% of their wealth from one actor to the other. And the direction is just a coin flip, and the amount is 20% of the wealth of the poorest actor. So if one actor has 100 in wealth and the other has 1,000, then 20 will be used in the transaction. The coin flip is just random to see which direction it goes. Now, if you keep on doing that, and you start out with a 1,000 actors that have equal wealth, you keep on doing that, after a while, all wealth will end up with one actor. It is a systemic property of that transaction model that all wealth will propagate to an ever smaller group, and eventually only one actor will end up with all the wealth. So this is actually a system dynamic that is present in our free markets. Because every time we make a transaction, there's always a slight error. Like I might sell something to you and you pay me less or more than what it is actually worth. So when that happens, there's a transfer of wealth happening. Now, if I'm a billionaire, then and you're a baker, the size of the transaction will be according to your wealth and not to mine. Because you're not going to pay me 10 million when you've got a normal salary, and I'm not gonna pay you 10 million for a loaf of bread. So if you look in society, even when we walk the streets, we give money to a beggar, we'll give him 50 cents, a euro, maybe 2 euros. We go to a restaurant and we tip the waiter, and it will be more. So it's even in our psyche that if we give people money, we will give them money according to the wealth they already have. And we scale it up or down. Now, this paper described, they actually did, so they ran the art sale model, and then they adapted it. And they applied all the redistributive measures that governments implement, like taxes and stuff like that. And they arrived at practically the exact same inequality that we see in real life. So there's more papers around it. They dug deeper, and they can actually see that with this model, you can simulate the real inequalities that are around the world. So this must be a system dynamic that is present in our free market. That also means that the only thing that works against it is governments that implement redistributive measures, but they're dependent on political ideology. And meritocratic thinking is on the rise. America has fallen prey to it completely, but it's also here in Europe, more and more governments are into meritocratic thinking. And meritocratic thinking is the belief that if I work hard, I will succeed. And if I am poor, then it's my own fault. That's not the case. There are plenty of examples that people, and this is something that happened in Holland. It's been in the newspapers. People that had a fine of 30 euros that they were actually not able to pay immediately. Then you got, I don't know what the English word is. We call it incasso bureaus. Those agencies that you can say like, okay, that person is in debt to me. Can you chase them?
A collections agency.
Sorry?
A collections agency.
Yeah. So a collection agency will then go after the 30 euros, but of course they're charging a fee, which is added to the 30 euros. So you got people that start with a small amount of debt, and now with all the collection agency on top of that, end up with like 15,000 euros in debt. I heard a story about a woman. She had nothing, and she had one of those collection agencies ringing at her door to collect something which she did not have, and then they charge her 1,500 euros for just showing up at the door. So there's a whole bunch of mechanisms in our current economic system that need a counterforce. And this dynamic in our free market is a systemic force that pushes towards equality, and it needs a counterforce that pushes towards equality. And this is actually what the monetary system that I created does, because it constantly redistributes wealth.
I'd like to stay with the yard sale model for a little bit because I think that it's really important for us to establish our basic perspectives on, like I said, the root cause of economic inequality. When I was asked to present a class on the economics of Silvio Gesell, I chose to call it Beyond Capitalism versus Socialism because because I think that it's important to contrast the socialistic perspective with the free market perspective, and to ask ourselves if we agree with the Marxist perspective, which essentially says that the system of private property and free markets is inherently unfair, and it inevitably leads to ever increasing wealth inequality and economic instability. And if that's the case, then obviously the idea of preserving free markets is a bad idea, because free markets are the root cause of economic dysfunction. On the other side of the spectrum is Silvio Gesell, who I consider to be the purest exponent of principles of free markets that I'm aware of. My interpretation of Gesell is that what he tells us is that the theoretical principles of free markets are correct and are valid, but that our implementation of those principles is fundamentally flawed. And if we identify those flaws and fix them, then a free market system will generate the results that are theoretically promised, which there's the saying, a rising tide that lifts all boats, that that a system of free markets and private property ultimately helps everyone, even though individual actors are primarily focused on their own self-interest. It seems to me that the yard sale model is an anti-free market perspective. It's saying that free voluntary exchange among sovereign individuals inevitably leads to increasing inequality, and therefore the whole idea of free voluntary exchange between sovereign individuals is problematic to begin with. Would you say that that is your perspective, that you are ultimately suspicious of and not in agreement with the basic principles of free markets?
Well, it's a very broad question, because there's a couple of things I want to address. But I'll start with a short answer. Free markets, yes, they can work, but it shouldn't be implemented everywhere. Free markets are a good idea for commercial products, but things like healthcare and education should not be in a free market. That should just be a service to the population. And how you organize that we can have a long debate on that, but I don't believe that is a place where free markets belong. I'm not against free markets per se, but free markets within a context that there is something that systemically pushes the other way. Because yes, based on the yard sale model, I do believe that free markets, if left alone, they will just increase inequality, and eventually all riches and all power end up with an ever decreasing group. This is, again, I think the United States is a prime example of that. You've basically got a billionaire who bought himself into power there. So there needs to be something that counters it. Then you said, like, people are only focused on their self-interest. I don't agree. Today I was just talking to a guy. He set up a an alternative for personal insurance, for an income guarantee. And people voluntarily, there's like a fund, and they pay money into it. And when someone says like, yeah, I've got a problem, I kind of need an income for a couple of months, people just trust each other. And they go like, yeah, sure, you can have some. And people don't misuse the system, because it's very often they say like, yeah, but if you give people a chance to misuse the system, they will always misuse it for their own profit and for the detriment of others. But if you look at human behavior, that's not the case. You see that behavior depending on background, usually people that have been around money a lot. And there's another research that shows that if you let people handle money afterwards, they're measurably less willing to share and less willing to help. And that behavior starts at the age of 3. That's how deeply the incentives of our current monetary system are ingrained in our behavior. As soon as people meet money, things start going wrong. Just look at inheritances. As soon as there's a large inheritance, then you can almost be sure that there will be fights among the family. Money just does something to us. It brings out the worst in us. Our current type of money.
Yes, I would fully agree with that. I would not go so far as to say that that is an inevitable consequence of any form of money. The entire Gussellian perspective is based on the belief that our existing form of money is just wrongly conceived, and that it makes complete sense that what you just described takes place, given that we often refer to, in a Gussellian perspective, we often refer to money as the blood of the economic organism. If the blood is diseased, then every cell, every organ throughout the organism will be prone to disease as well. And looking for local solutions, looking for a solution to kidney failure, looking to a solution for eczema is treating symptoms rather than root causes. And if you conclude that the root cause is the nature of money itself, then you don't necessarily reach the conclusion that free markets, properly conceived, need a corrective force on the other side in the form of government changing market outcomes. So I would say that you and I are discovering and establishing, our respective starting points for approaching these problems. We're not coming at it from quite the same place. There are some commonalities, and there are some differences. Just to make one last comment about the yard sale model, and the first thing that jumped out at me as being problematic is the idea of mistakes. You said essentially that when an exchange happens, someone is committing a mistake because they have not correctly calculated the value on one or both sides of the exchange. And that presupposes the existence of objectively measurable value, which I don't think is an accurate description of the world. That's a whole conversation in and of itself. But my view of collaborative production and exchange I'm sure you're familiar with Adam Smith's pin factory example, in which he describes the enormous power of the division of labor. That to me is where I start thinking about the free market system, where he describes a factory in which 10 people are working to make pins. And he says that he's witnessed this with his own eyes, and that he saw that the power of labor, that each of these 10 individuals working alone can only manufacture between 1 and 20 pins in a day, but working together, they can make 48,000 pins per person. So that's not a difference of 10% or 50% or 100%. That's a difference of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of percents. So even if exchange had an element of objective error, the extent of that error would have to be so big to offset the overall increase in economic welfare that I'm not persuaded by the idea that there is an inherent dynamic in free exchange, which is of such great magnitude that it offsets the benefits of collaborative production and exchange. Anyway, we don't need to spend the whole day on the yard sale model. I want to get to your proposal, your sustainable money system. But we've got a couple of hands raised, so let's take a question here. Anthony Gill, go ahead.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, Steph. I was struck by the amazing parallels between your path that you described and my path. And just briefly, you're in Bruges, I'm in Melbourne. You're in IT, I was a commercial pilot. We both had a pause on life. You had a sabbatical. I had COVID-19, which grounded me for a couple of years. We differ that you're doing a PhD because I'm a little bit more reformist orientated. I'm trying to take action on these things. But we've both come to a confluence where you've looked at taxation and money, and I've come to Henry George, which is taxation and money. But here we are sharing this video now. So you touched on a couple of points that I'd like to make mention about, because I've thought about these things and the idea of your savings. You mentioned if you have this time depreciating currency, people say, well, where do I get my savings from? Well, I've suggested the idea of a complementary currency for Australia. So you've got a new currency, demurrage, and it time depreciating. So, and it doesn't charge or pay interest. Would be distributed by UBI, but it runs in parallel with the Australian dollar, and the Australian dollar pays and earns interest. And so you've still got that existing use for our currency. So if people want to save in terms of money, then that avenue is still there. But the UBI, as you said, is distributed the complementary currency. So people get that in their hands, and it's time depreciating. So it forces the circulation of the economic lifeblood and reduces the instability. So that's the answer thing that I had for savings. And then you talked about free markets. If we take free markets as people are free to pursue whatever activities they choose and compete with each other on a level playing field and get to keep all the wealth that they earn with minimal interference from government in the form of subsidies and regulations, it's only natural, because we're not all equal, that some will be more successful at doing that than others. So over time, they become more successful and in that free market environment. And then when they reach a certain mass, they want to tilt the level playing field to their favour. So we sort of have agreed, you had your yard sale model, we sort of agreed that if you let the free market go, there'll be the winners and the monopolies and the losers. So how do you rationalise that in our democratic system? Well, our economy's basically divided into two sectors. There's the private sector and the public sector. So the priority of the private sector should be to operate in a free market as much as possible and to maximise profits and shareholder value. We are confused that we think that some private businesses need to have a social conscience, and that is not in their DNA. Their DNA is to make profits and to operate in a free market as much as possible. If we look at the other side of the economy, the public sector, well, they should prioritise people before profits, and ensure that the things that you mentioned, education and health, are provided through regulations and subsidies and controlling the free market for the people. So there are two sections of the economy. They both have a purpose. They're both needed. It's not an either or, but we need to have clarity about their roles. So that's, and as far as the root cause of economic inequality goes, I've come to the conclusion that it's the ingrained desire in people to get something for nothing at the expense of their fellow citizens. I think it comes from a zero-sum mentality, but it could be caused by the monetary system, as the discussion led to. So, yeah, I'd just like to emphasise the parallels of our approach and where we find ourselves now. Yeah, pretty much that's what I'm working towards here in Australia, a complementary currency, this division between free market and public market and so on. So anyway, that's a comment that I wanted to make, and I'm interested in what you have to.
I think you might be interested. I've got a paper that is available on ResearchGate that completely describes the model. I'm pretty sure that Josh will provide a link to it afterwards. It might be interesting. It's an interesting read.
Yeah, I will put the link to that paper in the description when this is published on YouTube.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's one more thing I'd like to react on. You say that the private sector doesn't need a social conscience. I disagree. The private sector, we've got this idea that the private sector needs to be a for-profit sector. I wonder why. Why do we need to put profit and shareholder value above everything? If I run a company and I'm very profitable and I'm destroying the living environment of my fellow men, then something's wrong. I'm not saying that people are not allowed to, make a buck on what they're doing with their business, but there's also responsibility towards society with everything you do, because you do not live in isolation. You cannot say like, oh, I can do whatever I want if I just make, and other people will clean up after me. It's like I come to your house, I trash the place, and then I go like, it's not my problem, it's yours. So I've got a problem with this profit and shareholder value above everything, because we need to look out for our fellow man, because we're together on this globe, and we need to share it. We need to tend to it, and within the boundaries, as long as we don't damage others, then we go like, sure, go pursue your dreams, go pursue what you want. But in the end, if you look at human nature, we always look for meaning. We want to mean something in life. And that our current system is destroying that, and it's replacing it with numbers. And people are not numbers. And there's I don't know how it is how it is in Australia, but here in Europe, we see a wave of burnouts and depressions. And I think that this has to do with the fact that our current economic system is destroying our humanity. It forces us to behave in a way that we actually don't want. Because humans, from what I've read, the research that I've read on it, we want to help each other. We want to be there for each other. We want to mean something for each other. And that goes way beyond profit and shareholder value.
I agree with all of that. What I was referring to is the expectation that private companies have a social conscience. Now, it's up to the people who own the companies to sit on that spectrum wherever they choose. They could be totally just for profit. But as you say, most people want to help humanity along the way. So an owner might bring it back towards focusing more on people and social conscience. That's their choice, but we should not expect it. And that's where we get terribly confused.
True, but it's also, if you're working within a system where your best chance of survival is to go for profit and shareholder value, then it's really hard to do the opposite. It's almost like expecting, like you say, like here are the rules of football, and now we expect you to play basketball. It's not going to happen. See, it's like the context that is created through the monetary and economic system that we have, and the economic system is an emergent part of the monetary system that's underneath it, that almost no one looks at. It creates rules and behaviors. It's filled with incentives that push us in the wrong direction. I saw an interview with David Graeber, and he said he had read a letter from a large oil company asking the government, please put in stronger regulations so we can do the right thing, because we want to do the right thing, but within this system, we are forced to do the wrong thing. So we really need to look at context and what are the incentives that are built into the systems that we put out there in the world.
I just want to throw in my 2 cents, and then we'll get to the next question. I think that self-interest versus being community oriented is sometimes unnecessarily put in either or terms. And I think that this is an accurate statement of Silvio Gesell to say that he thought that people should be free to do good, to work in a community-oriented manner, because they perceive that that is a reflection of their self-interest, but that they should not ever be forced to behave that way. So I think that's a reasonable sort of splitting of the difference, and a way of seeing that these are not mutually exclusive approaches. If I'm a billionaire living in my castle, and my neighbors are struggling to get by, and they're racked by drug addiction and strife, their misfortune has a material impact on my self-interest as I perceive it. They're improving their circumstances could very easily be put in context of an effort to address my own self-interest. Anyway, I want to get to the next question here, which is Joe Polito. Let me add you to the screen. Joe, welcome. Go ahead.
Hi, very interesting discussion. uh, one of the things that Henry George presenters like Josh have focused on is the fact that uh, the people have many needs and aspirations economically, and the ultimate constraint is the limitation on the factors of production, land, labor, and capital. And the money is just a legal construct. And what Josh and others, and it sounds like you as well, are saying is that there's no need for them to be a shortage of money. It's we can produce enough of. And we unfortunately don't, and therefore we never bump into these. We do leave these factors of production idle and don't produce what we could. And I just want to apply that for a second to your point about the problem is money. I think Jane Goodall had a situation where there was lots of bananas available for a group of chimps. They put them out. And what quickly happened was the higher ranked chimps were hoarding the bananas. And there was fights over competition for this surplus. And I don't think it's really the money is the problem. It's our instinct to get more of the surplus for ourselves. But my question is, your UBI, you said that's an integral part of your mechanism, your proposal. How much would it be per person, and how would it be? What would it be issued from? Is it from taxes? Is it money creation? Those are my two questions about that part of your. It seems to be key part of your proposal. Thanks.
I'll start with answering the second question. It's money creation.
Yeah.
So it's actually the source of money in the system. So
Public
you create money through the UBI and you destroy it through demurrage. That way you got a system that your total amount of money in your society will scale with your population. Since the size of your population is kind of a little bit of an indicator of the size of your economy, that means that the total amount of money scales with your economy as well. As for the amount, that's a tough question to answer because if you change the monetary system to that model, everything changes. Like literally everything. Because I don't know what prices will do. Your money gets redistributed. Like 7,000-pound cocktails like they're served now in London will probably no longer be served because no one will be able to pay that amount of money on a cocktail. So prices will probably level out. It might be that prices come down. Of course, if you start giving everyone 100,000 a month, then you've got a huge amount of money in your system, then prices might go up. I don't have a clear answer to it, but what I propose is that we start off with keeping the total money stock stable as it is now and giving everyone enough to have a decent life with. That means they can afford housing, they can afford healthy food, and they've got enough money for some leisure activities.
Okay, so this would be, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this would be sovereign issued money.
Yes.
And with the standard UBI format, and you just haven't determined whether that would be 2% per year or 5% or whatever increase over the previous year's money supply.
You don't have to increase it. Your money supply stabilizes after a while. Because say you've got, I live in Europe, so I'll say it in euros. So you got 2,000 euros a month. I actually got a simulation running. If you live here in Belgium and you get 2,000 euros a month, you can get by with that. And to keep the total amount of money stable, you need about 3.36% demurrage per month. So let's round it down to 2%. That means that first month you got 2,000 on your account. You do nothing with it. At the end of the month, we take off 2%, which is 40 euros. And then we deposit another 2,000 on it. That means that your second month, your net income is not 2,000, but 2,960. So the more money you have on your account, the less your net increase will be. But the more money you have in your account, the more money you have available as, you know, as savings. With 2% and 2,000, that would give, let me see, 400,000 euros, I think. 400, no, hold on. Hold on a sec.
I'll just make a comment when you're looking for
Yeah,
that.
you'd have 100,000 euros on your account if you do nothing with your account after a while.
So the other thing that's happening is there's human innovation, there's productivity increases, there's things which increase productivity and therefore total wealth. How do you account for that increase in GDP, real wealth, real goods and services? Do you account for that in your model as well, or do you expect deflation, or how would that work?
Well, I think prices, what you have in our current system is that your total amount of money is constantly increasing. So you got volatility in your money stock, you got volatility in your production, and you got volatility in your prices. What the system would do is it would lock in your money stock. That doesn't mean that your prices can vary, because then it'll depend on how high your production is, and your prices and your will adapt to the production in relation to the total amount of money in your system. So prices can go up, can go down. You can have a little bit of inflation, a little bit of deflation. It'll fluctuate depending on how high your productivity is. But in contrast to our current system, when you have deflation, there is not a problem. There's no problem with deflation in this monetary system. Prices go down. People will not start holding on to their money because all of a sudden they can buy more with less. Because if they hold on to the money, then it'll evaporate through demurrage.
I'd like to try to take a couple of steps backwards from where we are right now. And go back to, you said that your entry point for starting to think about this subject was becoming aware of the Positive Money organization. My understanding of what positive money is about is it is a recognition of the idea that you and I completely agree on, which is that the current paradigm of money creation through bank lending is insane and irrational, and that essentially contracting the function of money creation out to private corporations is should never have happened, and that needs to be reversed. I completely agree with that. However, it's not necessarily the case that, so if we eliminate money creation by bank lending, the question is what mechanism replaces it for the purpose of creating money. UBI is one possibility for sure. It's not the only possibility. Personally, it's not my preferred mechanism for money creation. Another way of creating money would be for government to simply create new currency and spend it directly into the economy on public goods, on building infrastructure, on creating a healthcare system, an education system. The reason why I am somewhat hesitant on the subject of UBI, you actually addressed in your paper, which I thought was great. You said, if I'm understanding you correctly, that the term universal basic income is problematic because it implies that the purpose is to provide the recipients with a basic standard of living. But that goal is not necessarily consistent with or harmonious with the function of money creation. I think Silvio Gesell would make the case that UBI, while it might be a reasonable mechanism for creating currency, we probably, with a demurrage currency, we probably don't need anywhere near as much of it as we think. And therefore, the UBI might only be $50 a month or something like that in order to create an adequate money supply. So I think that there is potentially a tension between UBI understood as a means to provide a basic standard of living, and what you suggested a different term, which I think was guaranteed income.
Yes.
Which I agree is a better term because it does not necessarily imply that its purpose is to establish a base standard of living, but rather that its primary purpose is monetary creation.
Well, yeah, but I sometimes use UBI because everyone knows what that is. But I do prefer the term guaranteed income. But I also, what I've got against UBI is not completely the same of what you have against UBI. To me, what I have against UBI is that then we should only give everyone just the bare minimum to survive. And I'm like, we can give a little bit more. I'm a proponent of giving everyone enough so they can actually have a decent life, so that their incentive to work is not necessarily more money, but more purpose, more meaning, more, because that intrinsic motivation to work becomes more important than extrinsic motivation to work. Because we'll be doing a lot more interesting work that way.
How do you again, I'm still agnostic on the subject of UBI. How do you address the concern that, how do you get under a UBI system, how do you get people to do the jobs that nobody wants to do, but that society needs done?
Well, what like what?
Trash collection.
Okay, I was expecting exactly that. I got a friend of mine, he talked to his trash collectors. They love their job. We always assume that no one wants to collect the trash. He talked to him, he says, like, we love this work. And the reason is, well, one is they're fixed hours, but the other thing is this is really important. They know that they're doing a service to society. They know their job is important. And that's one of the reasons why they like doing it. And they're out with friends and they can have a chat and at the same time, but they know that their work is important. We have a totally wrong idea of what motivates people to work. A lot of people I talk to, it's like, oh, it's money. Research has been done. If you give someone a pay rise, it will motivate them for a month. And then the motivation from the pay rise is eliminated. It's gone. But what does motivate people to work is that they know what their work is for. They know what it means. If they've got a feeling like I'm contributing to something, that will motivate them. And
there's a book called Drive, which I think it's written by Pink, and he makes your point exactly.
yeah,
He says the three drives or motivations that are more important than money are mastery, autonomy, and purpose.
yes. And we've created an economic system where it's all about the money. There's numerous people that I know who would love to do something else, but they can't because they need money. So now they're doing a job that actually bores them to death, but they would actually love doing something that would be of service to society, but they can't make money with it. It's ludicrous. The system that we've constructed is crazy. But
Can I just
sorry.
I just want
that that the goals of providing a basic standard of living via monetary issuance is consistent with creating a supply of money which performs money's function effectively, which is to say establishes price stability. I suspect that those two things are probably not consistent. And another way of saying that is that if you are giving people enough money so that everyone can be comfortable, that is probably going to end up being highly inflationary.
Why?
Because you're putting purchasing power into people's hands without requiring them to give goods and services in exchange. There's no balance there. The essence of a market economy is, I know that barter was never a widely used system, but it is often used to help us think about ideas of economic fairness. If I'm using the sweat of my brow to produce eggs and you're using the sweat of your brow to produce milk, and we decide on a ratio of exchange that we're both okay with, then there is balance because the purchasing power is equal to the goods and services that exist to be purchased. And I feel that severing that balance, the Say's law is the economic term for saying that purchasing power and purchasing capacity in a market economy will be in balance. And my concern is that by asking the mechanism of money creation to perform two very different functions, that you would likely end up with a system that is not balanced.
Well, your assumption is that everyone thinks transactionally, which is not the case. Say I use the sweat of my brow to produce eggs and you need eggs and I have no financial problems. Here are your eggs. I'll just give them to you. It is okay. We underestimate the value of volunteer work. People that just do work not for money, but just because they want to help people. They've calculated it in Holland. It's 200 and the worth of the volunteer work. So this is work that no one is being paid for, is 250 billion euros per year. We are living in, like I said, we are living in the context of a transactionary system where more and more things become commodities. This goes against our human nature. Money should be a safety, a safe net. What my prediction is, if you move towards a system that everyone has enough money to be financially secure and makes sure that inequality goes down, money will become less important and people will use money less. And they will be more willing to just give things away, because if the sweat of my brow is done with passion and I enjoy doing that, then I want to share the fruits of it. But it's a concept that sounds alien while it is core of our human nature. We have not become the most dominant species on the planet because we are hyper competitive. We have become the dominant species of the planet because we are hyper cooperative. Anthony's, I think it was Anthony who told about the chimps fighting over the bananas. If you put 10,000 chimps in a room who don't know each other, you've got war. We crowd together with thousands of unknown people and we move along peacefully. We are collaborators. We are not competitors. And because I saw Paul writing a couple of things and they just popped up. I've developed a game. I've developed 2 games. And there's 2 layers to it. There's the game layer and there's the monetary layer. And one game is a simple card game. In the beginning of the game, you get an envelope. There's cards in there. There might be money in it. There might be a lot of money in it. And then you need to start trading. You need to buy and sell cards from each other. When you've got a set of 4 cards, you hand them in, you get 4 new cards, you can keep on trading. Every set of cards you hand in gives you points. At the end of the game, the amount of points you've collected determines your pension at the end of the game. We play it in different rounds. We play it twice. The first time we play it with a slightly simplified version of the model I'm working with, which means that after each round, and we ask everyone who's got 3,000 or less, we've given them 2,000. We ask everyone who's got more than 6,000, and we take away 50% of the surplus. In the middle of the room, there is a box in which people can voluntarily put money for projects for the common good. So we play that. Then we reset everything. Now we play it with the current monetary system, which means all the money in the game is dead. So we let everyone draw 3 tokens from a bag, and that's your starting debt. It might be you have no money and you've got debt. It might be you've had a lot of money and no debt, or something in between. By the end of the game, all debt has to be paid off. I know this is an exaggeration of our current monetary system, but the workshop lasts for about an hour, so we need to compress the effects. There's a master student in Holland who did a master thesis on the game. And her conclusions were that with the new monetary system, people felt happier. They were more open and willing to help their co-players. They felt less stressed. At the end of the game, practically everyone had a decent pension. Some had a luxury pension. We collected a decent amount of money for projects for the common good. With the current monetary system, people felt stressed. They were focused on themselves. They began to become hyper competitive, and they felt miserable. And we collected practically nothing for projects for the common good. People even gave back. And this was a workshop that I actively facilitated, they were like, we didn't even see the box anymore. We were so occupied with paying off our debt that we could not see anything else. This is what our current monetary system, it is a psychological nightmare that we've created. It's not about the numbers. It's about the human psychology within the system. It's detrimental.
Well, I absolutely agree that our consciousness is shaped by the economic forces that we're subject to, and most of the time in ways that we are unaware of and have never thought about, and that different economic circumstances would result in different human consciousness and different human behavior. So I'm very sympathetic to that orientation. I also love the idea of games as a as a teaching tool and also as a research tool. I've heard that idea come up in many different quarters, including my own mother. My mother, I talked to her about Gestalt and the work that I do with this stuff, and she always says, "Well, I don't understand it, but it sounds good." But she suggested the idea of a game. She's like, everybody plays Monopoly as a kid, and Monopoly Monopoly is one of, our formative cultural experiences. So what if a game existed that served that purpose for instead of developing a consciousness built on private property and scarcity, programmed us with better, more wholesome, more community-oriented conditioning.
There's a book by Jane McGonigal titled Reality is Broken. And in it, she gives a definition of a game. And she says, you've got a game when you have a set of rules, a goal, a feedback system, and voluntary participation. If you look at that, we play a lot of games in our life. Almost everything we do is a game. We just don't realize it. So the entire economy is a game. I also, because I kind of want to come back to a remark that was said earlier about production, our production capacity. We currently do not live in a consumption society. We don't. We live in a production society which has gone overboard, and they're using commercials to make us buy more. I mean, if you look at the quality of products that we produce today, if you look at the tons and tons and tons and tons of garbage, it's ludicrous. If the economy was really about managing scarce resources and divide that among as many people as possible, then we would start producing goods that last, that are repairable, that use less resources. I mean, fast fashion is putting tons and tons of new clothes on dump sites in the desert. It's ridiculous.
Well, I think most people who have thought about this stuff would agree that a measure such as GDP is an absurd way to analyze our economic lives, because from the point of view of GDP, a carton of cigarettes and a guitar lesson have equal economic value, and obviously they don't have equal human value.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
So we could actually drastically reduce our output and still have a great life. There's also the thing that there was also on a remark you gave earlier, like, the sweat of my brow thing. They interviewed people from hunter-gatherer tribes. And there's one story that really stood out. So you got a bunch of people that go hunting, and in the evening they bring back prey and they feed the entire village. But there are some members of the village who don't go out hunting because they gamble with spear points. And if you go out hunting with the spear points, they damage the spear points and they can gamble with it. Now, from where we stand as Westerners, we would say like, oh, free riders, you should punish them. You should not give them food. So they asked the hunters, like, doesn't it bother you? And you know what the reply of the hunters was? What are you talking about? We're having fun with the hunt. They're having fun with gambling. So what? Who cares? We're all having a good life. And yeah, of course, we're going to share what we bring in. And then we can have a chat with them and they share their stories and we have a good time together and everything's great. But we've lost that. We've gotten in, we created a society where people are envious. And I think it is because you have too many people that have a really well-paying job they actually hate. But then because they have been dragging themselves out of bed every single day for years on end, while they didn't want to, then they say like, but I earned this because I sacrificed my life for work that I actually didn't want to do. So now I should be rewarded for that. And you shouldn't have fun.
Anthony Gill, do you have your hand raised? Do you want to join us again?
I'm loving where this conversation is going, and I'm conscious that you're probably running out of time, so I'll keep it short. But just underneath this conversation is our humanity, and it's sort of bubbling forth. You can see it, particularly in the comments, when Paul says that perhaps money is an archeon device to separate us from our divine spark. And I think that's it. Our present use of money does oppress our humanity. And Fernanda, I love volunteering in the local park and picking up trash. Well, I do the same thing. So we've got this humanity that's just waiting to be unlocked. And our present use of money is suppressing it. And what we're talking about with the UBI, and my preferred term is citizens' dividend, because it's a dividend paid to citizens from the wealth of the society, it is the way, I think, to use our money in a new way, to unlock our humanity. We talked about how much should it pay. Well, I've looked at the Australian example under the after the reforms of Henry George. So we introduce a broad-based land value and resources rent tax and take the tax off income. If we did that in Australia and paid a UBI of $1,000 or $1,500 a fortnight to every Australian citizen, we could do that quite comfortably with a 10% of GDP deficit every year. So spending a little bit more than what we're getting in. For historical comparisons, prior to COVID, our largest deficit spending was 4 to 5%. During COVID, with the stimulus, we were spending 10% of GDP more than what we brought in.
Yeah.
In my view, if it's done correctly with certain guidelines, it will not be inflationary at all at 10%. And we don't need more than 10%. And that would be created through MMM, monetary money techniques. In other words, creating the money. But that's all we need to do, and there'll be no inflationary impact whatsoever, in my view. So we can have definitely a citizen's dividend there. My citizen's dividend, although we tend to think of it as being granted unconditionally, my citizen's dividend in my ideal world would have conditions that the recipients of the citizen's dividend would have to contribute back to society in some way. And we talked about that. I'd have two levels. One, a compulsory participation in national service, which would be a blend between reservist military training and emergency services like fire and fire's a big thing in Australia. So some sort of formal contribution like that. And then there'd be a discretionary component where people would contribute to society as and according to their means and ability. It could be something like aged care, something as simple as picking up trash in your street, those sorts of voluntary things. So there would be a compulsory element and a discretionary element, but people would be expected to contribute back to society in some way. And yeah, I think that what we were talking about there, our humanity would bubble to the surface. And Steph, I agree with you that people would find new meaning and a richer type of life, things that have no economic value or very little economic value. Josh, take for example, being a musician. Musicians and artists and things like that contribute to our rich tapestry of life. And I think that would become more prominent with people's basic needs taken care of. We don't have to give them a great life, but just as long as they've got sufficient to put a roof over their head, food on the table, clothes on their backs, humanity, in my view, would blossom. And it's lovely to see we're sort of talking about this thing, because I'm not the only one thinking that. You know, it's good to see that others are thinking that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also glad I'm not the only one. I do want to say something about, for me, the unconditional part is very important. Because who are we to say when someone contributes something to society? I'll give a simple example. Imagine you've got someone, and the only thing he does is goes visit friends and hangs out with them and has chats, and nothing more. Then we could say like, oh, he's not contributing to society, but he's contributing to the social fabric of his friends. He gives them support, the psychological support. That means they don't need to go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist and pay a fee, because they've got friends that hang out with them. So I've once had a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were determining, when is someone completely useless? And we even came to the point that someone who's lying in a coma still contributes to society, because friends and family members can come there and chat to that person, and it can actually be psychologically healthy for them to just talk to someone who doesn't even respond. So for me, the unconditional part has to be there, because otherwise we're giving someone power to decide what is value and what is not. And we cannot do that. That's also why I believe that money creation through a UBI is the better system, because you do not put the power in the hands of people to determine where the money should go, because it's bound to go. That's also my criticism on MMT. MMT is, if you look at it from a technical point of view, yeah, sure, it works. But you have to look at it from a human psychology point of view. It is dependent on political ideology. If those in power think that all the money should go into the military, then money will only be created for the military. If Trump would today implement MMT, I don't think that the weakest in society would be served. And that's the weak point of MMT. And that is something that UBI has not. It is completely neutral. Everyone gets the same. And then you can still, because, you know, we live in a society where to have a decent life, you need money, because, you know, we've created this transaction system. And so why not say, like, you know, everyone has a right to a certain income every month. And that is not debatable. Everything else that they might get on top of that might be debatable. You know, if someone has a severe handicap, they might get more. That's collected through taxes and everything. But everyone has a guaranteed income that is just not debatable. I am sometimes asked, like, okay, but what is the backing? Human potential. because mathematically you can calculate there's that much money in existence per person. So average human potential is expressed as this amount of money. And what better backing can you have than human potential? And those that will have more, that exploit their potential more, they will become richer, and other ones not. And yes, there will be free riders, but who cares, really? Because it is not in our human nature to massively become free riders. So yeah, you've got a couple of free riders, bless them.
Good points. Yep.
I agree that human potential is really the only backing of any form of money. I think the whole idea of backing money is just an illogical thought process to begin with. Money facilitates human collaboration,
Yeah.
and as I referred to the Adam Smith pin factory example, the magnitude is so large. The magnitude of wealth creation that is made possible through human collaboration, which cannot be accomplished without a medium of exchange, at least at this stage of human evolution, is so big that any notion of backing it with precious metals or any other commodity is, I would say, a fundamental misunderstanding of what money really is. We've got a little bit less than a half an hour left, so I'd like to shift gears a little bit,
Yeah.
and pose this question to you. One of the biggest questions that I have wrestled with in the 17 years or so since becoming acquainted with the ideas of Silvio Gesell is I find these ideas completely persuasive and completely logical. I don't find any logical holes in the argument or the theory, but how do we get from here to there? The vision that you are describing is a beautiful one. I would much prefer to live in the world that you're describing. But what is the path for actually bringing these ideas to fruition? Do you believe that demurrage currency is something that could ever be implemented through existing national governments? And if not, what is the path for making these beautiful ideas a reality?
Well, I've thought about that quite a lot. I don't have a definite answer, but there are a couple of options. The easiest path, well, the easiest and at the same time the hardest path is if you would get central banks to collaborate. Everyone's talking about central bank digital currency, and that would be an ideal opportunity to use this template to create a central bank digital currency and have it implemented at large scale from the get-go. That's one path. But it is really hard to get into those institutions. We're trying to. Currently we've got like one toe in, maybe with the National Bank of Belgium. We'll see. We did do a workshop with the Ministry of Finance of our previous government, and apparently they're still talking about it. So that's good. It's, planting seeds everywhere. So that's one option. The second option is making enough people aware that something like this is possible. I always say everything's impossible until it's done. If you look at history, there were plenty of cases that were once thought to be impossible, and yet they happened. 40-hour week, paid vacation, right to strike, women's voting rights, gay marriage, the list goes on. So is it possible? Yeah, of course it's possible. Will it happen? I don't know. But if we make enough people aware, if we make enough people see that if we create a movement that's large enough that demands this, then yeah, then we can make it happen. We can start making it happen by creating our own complementary currency and just start using it. And if it expands to a size that it cannot be stopped anymore, then we can just talk to governments and say, like, you know what? You can join us. I currently have a simulation running with the real numbers from Belgium with GDP, pensions, all the government expenses. And I can prove that the entire Belgian economy can run on this system, and all our tax deficits are history. Because you can implement a tax system that is also demurrage based, and that means that you can cover your expenses guaranteed. In the same simulation, if I use the income tax from that we use today, we always have a deficit. So it is mathematically provable that an economy can run on it. And then we just need to see, I believe the best strategy is to keep trying getting into the top institutions, and at the same time making the people aware that this is possible and starting grassroots projects. You can start locally, a local complementary currency based on this, and say, like, you know, we'll just create mixed prices. I've even thought about a low threshold adoption scheme, which you say, like, okay, everyone can open an account with conditions. So you say, like, I'm offering this, and I will activate my account if I can buy this, this, and this. You put that on a digital platform, and it's just like everyone's wishes and offers are gathered. And at one point, you will see that an entire network, that all the needs are fulfilled by the offers of the others, and you can activate the entire network at once. And then there's a second component, and this is commitment. And that's where you say, like, I'll commit for a certain percentage. Imagine that the guaranteed income is 2,000 a month. If you commit for 10%, that means you will receive an income of 200, and you sell your products for 10% in this new currency and 90% in the old currency. But now, if you're enthusiastic and you say, like, I commit for 100% and I buy something from you, then the lowest commitment level is used. So there's a reciprocity, and it protects people with a higher commitment from other people dumping money in their accounts. So if you're at 100% and I'm at 10% and I buy something from you, I can still only pay 10% of the price in this new currency. And that way you create an incentive for people to join and people to increase their commitment levels.
I fully agree with the alternative/community approach to developing these kinds of ideas, because I have zero hope that that these ideas will make any headway in our conventional political system. I don't. I'm a U.S. citizen. I don't see a political party that I can become a part of and promote these ideas with any hope of experience anything but banging my head against a wall. In my view, it would be a complete waste of my time and energy, and I can't prove that's the case, and I do not dissuade anyone else from pursuing it through those channels if they feel motivated to do that. But I'm convinced that my energies are best directed in the direction of building and experimenting with alternative community based models. So given that we're again down to less than 20 minutes, maybe you could tell us a bit about Happonomy. What is Happonomy? What do you do in Happonomy? And is Happonomy something that people watching this might want to get involved with?
Yeah, Happonomy is it's been we've been looking for something to kind of you could say that we're a research center that is looking into ways to transform our economy into a regenerative economy. And regenerative in the broad sense, not just in material, but also in well-being. We're currently a non-profit. We're planning to start a for-profit this year. We offer a couple of services. The workshop is one. We've got an online platform called TribeForce, which is a skill management system that goes beyond the regular skill management system, because you can not only say what you're good at, you can also say whether you still like doing it. And then you can say whether you can teach to someone else. That way you can create groups that you say, okay, we've got someone here who's really good at something. They hate it by now. We've got something here who wants to learn it. We'll put them together. Then that person can teach that person how to do it, and they can start doing something else. The platform's called TribeForce. I see Paul asking for the URL. I don't know it by heart. It's somewhere on our website, I guess. Otherwise, send us an email. We've got a couple of business models. All our models are open source. You can just download them from the site. Also, we implement different business models. For example, the TribeForce thing, it's a subscription, but if we see that you don't use your subscription for 3 months, we'll send you an email and tell you, like, we stopped charging you. We've seen that you haven't been using our software anymore. Are you still using it? Is something that we can do for you, and otherwise you stop paying. Because we do want to put our money where our mouth is. So we want to act the way that we want to walk the way we preach. We've got a value canvas that might be interesting for some people. That's downloadable from the website. We do consultancy work for small businesses or middle-sized businesses to transform their business model into a regenerative business model. And we do, so that's our within system work. And then we do our outside, our new system work. I'm mainly involved with that. I do everything that's money within Happonomy. I've got a little bit of a side project, which is about election systems. A couple of days ago, I gave a TEDx talk about that. It'll be coming online. We also need to change our voting system because our one vote per person for one party or candidate is flawed. I'd say look into ranked voting system and the Schultz single transferable vote, and you'll see that we get way better, more democratic outcomes. And at least we can also say what we do not want. Also for the US, that would mean that presidential candidates that are now independent and never stand a chance actually would be part of the race. I think that's Happonomy in a nutshell.
So given that this program is brought to you all by the Henry George School and the Silvio Gesell Foundation, one thing that both organizations have in common, and that, Stef, we have not yet touched on at all, is the question of land. Do you engage with that side of the Gesellian/Georgist critique of the existing economic order, or I mean, certainly one man and one organization can't do everything. So I'm not by any means saying that you have to have an answer to this. But Gesell, for example, would say that fixing money without fixing land will not work, because if you deny money its function as a vehicle for hoarding and for increasing wealth inequality, that will just be shifted to land, and private ownership of land will become the sole vehicle for ever increasing wealth inequality. So is that a part of the picture that you engage with in your work at all?
Well, this is a question that people ask me quite often, actually. It's like, yeah, but if you're gonna put demurrage money, then people will just buy up land and buildings and everything. And they go like, yeah, but your land needs to be managed. Well, actually, there's two answers to this question. One, the monetary system is not a solution for everything. You've got layers on top of that. Your laws, so your legal system and everything stacks on top of your monetary system to solve problems that the monetary system cannot solve. But if you've got land and people need to work on that land for you to actually have an income from that land, then they need to be willing to do that. And if people have financial security, then they might just say like, you know what? I don't want to work for you because you don't treat us right. I don't want to work for you because you're doing things that I don't like. So it might, I'm not saying it will, but there is definitely a possibility that the problem might solve itself. Because as Gesell said, money is the only thing that doesn't rot and doesn't need maintenance and doesn't wear. Everything else does. So if you're gonna own a lot of stuff that rots, wears, or needs maintenance, then you're gonna need to start putting a lot of effort to do that, and you need to find people willing to do that for you. And if you give people financial security, you also give them political power, and that might shift things way more than we think. And if the monetary system doesn't solve it, then we can put on layers on top of the monetary system that taxes land in surplus.
All right. I've seen there's been a whole bunch of activity in the chat. As I mentioned, I'm unable to look at any of that, but we've got 10 minutes left. So if any of you folks who have been chatting would like to join the conversation, now is the time to do so. Paul, all right, let's bring you on screen. Paul,
Hey, Paul.
welcome.
Hello, Stef. Blessings from Kansas, Missouri. I just want to thank Stef for doing all this work. I met him a couple of years ago and has inspired a small group of us to create something here in Missouri, and then to follow that on by co-creating something in Europe and hopefully in Africa and the Far East. So we can't wait to get our hands on our first grants and to have Stef and Bruno over here in this sacred place to share with us the teaching. So it's mainly just a thank you. And thank you, Josh, for having Stef on the program today. Many, many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. All right. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, Stef, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you. It's an inspiring vision that you're describing. I hope that this will just be the beginning of channels of communication between myself and you, between hopefully members of the audience and you as well. And I wish you the best of luck in everything that you're working on. It's an ambitious program.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here, and to everyone who joined in. Thank you for listening. It really means a lot.
All right.
The thing is, this can only work if we can spread the word, and it can only work if people have conversations about it. So thank you all.
Absolutely. That's what we're here for. So thank you. We'll see you all next time.
Okay, thanks. Bye.